Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining our session, which is devoted to youth activism for the Arctic region and delivered by Arctic Angels from non-governmental organization Global Choices. So we are here today to introduce you the Arctic Angels, tell you about why it's important to take action to protect the Arctic and our planet. Share with you how we are taking action in our own ways and hopefully inspire you to get involved. So we will be very happy to answer your questions. So feel free to send them through the chat during the presentation. And now I will give the floor to Emma, the coordinator of Arctic Angels. So Emma, your turn.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Emma Wilkinson and I'm the coordinator of Arctic Angels. Today I'm joined by Divya, Savanah and Mitzi, who you'll be mostly hearing from today. First, I'd like to say a big thank you to Anastasia for organising this session and putting so much hard work into the last few days, raising awareness of the changes happening in the Arctic and facilitating discussions around how we can respond. Also, thank you to Divya, Savanah and Mitzi for all taking part in this despite different time zones, and some of you are up quite early and quite late, and it doesn't go unnoticed. You're very appreciated. So I know that over the last couple of days, there have been sessions on climate change and Arctic experiences of it. In this session, we'll be focusing on young people taking action and collaborating to protect the Arctic. I will be giving an introduction to the organisation Global Choices, of which, as Anastasia said, the Arctic Angels Network is a part, and then the network itself before handing over to these phenomenal young women so they can share how they're getting involved to create change and to protect our global commons in their own creative and powerful ways. So why are we mobilising to drive action that protects the Arctic? This animation effectively portrays the ice crisis that we are all as a global collective currently facing. Arctic sea ice is dynamic and it forms and melts in the Arctic Ocean each year. In summer, there is the sea ice minimum, meaning it covers the least area. You can see here that there's been a long-term decline in the sea ice extent over the last 4 decades. The loss of this sea ice threatens the unique biodiversity of this area and has global consequences for climate stability. The ice acts as a global, a big protective blanket, if you will, and it reflects the sun's heat in what's known as the albedo effect. And as the sea ice is diminished, the dark ocean beneath it is revealed, and more heat is therefore absorbed, causing more warming, which impacts temperature, winds, weather globally. And Divya will tell you a little bit more about the exponential impacts when she speaks. But this positive feedback loop is an example of why what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. Globally, in less than 3 decades, we have lost 28 trillion tonnes of ice, our planet's cooling system and a global climate regulator, the ice crisis. And it's important that we take urgent, wise and prioritised decisions to protect the ice, because we can't plant ice, and once it's gone, as it says there. And this is why the organisation Global Choices is focused on moving the ice crisis to the top of the global agenda. As a feminine-led and inclusive organisation, Global Choices is committed to empowering youth and harnessing intergenerational working in its processes. And a manifestation of this is the Arctic Angels Network, a youth-led intergenerational action network. And the Arctic Angels are young women collaborating to show that there is power when they bring together their voices to create a ripple effect for a more sustainable, just and biodiverse world for everyone. As next generation voices of influence, the Arctic Angels are mobilising globally to speak up for the protection of our global commons, and you'll hear from all the angels doing that later in a minute. Currently, we're in 13 countries, from Greenland to the Philippines, and we're always growing and welcoming young climate leaders to the network. And when I say that the Angels are mobilising globally, I don't just mean that they're mobilising around the world, but I mean that they're mobilising as global citizens with a global holistic outlook, and with a resolve to ensure that we address the problems as a global collective. So as you'll gather from Divya, Savanah and Mitzi's presentations, the Angels are very diverse with different backgrounds and current focuses, but they're all united under their shared goal of protecting our planet. Given that the session is focused on youth action and galvanising others to get involved, I wanted to share an example of how the Arctic Angel Network has taken action to raise awareness of the ice crisis before and call for better protection of the Arctic ecosystem. So at the World Economic Forum in 2020, where the mission was to improve the state of the world, we used blue beanies to capture attention and for our campaign for Hands Off These Regions, and to promote an understanding of the importance of the poles to the interconnected global ecosystem. Our beanies were actually made from unique Reprieve polyester yarn, so each beanie saved 4 plastic bottles from entering our oceans. Okay, so now, without further ado, I will hand over to Divya, who'll talk about her experience advocating for the polar ice and why the Arctic needs protection. Throughout today, please keep in your minds how you would capture attention to drive action that protects the Arctic. We'd love to hear from you, and at the end of the session, you'll see our contact information, or at the bottom of every slide, you can see our website where you can get in touch and see more about us. But over to you, Divya.
Hey, Tammy.
Hello. Thank you, Emma. Hi, could I request everyone to go on mute, please? Thank you. So yeah, great ending on that note about how do you capture attention to the Arctic. For a young girl like me, coming from India, what attracted me to the Arctic? Well, my journey actually started down south, the Antarctic, which is actually because the Arctic was named first. And then the opposite of the Arctic, which is in the south, is the Antarctic. And that's where my journey began more than 10 years ago at this point. But I was chosen from India as a young champion to go raise awareness about the polar regions. And that took me to a place, a very special place on the planet. And just to give you an idea how big Antarctica is, it's almost 900 miles from the closest point on the coast to the South Pole. That's how big Antarctica is. It's bigger than Australia and Europe. And for also, just to give you a sense of this size of it, you can see that the state of Texas has just been overlapped over a really tiny part of the Antarctic. That's how big it is. That's a lot of ice, right? Emma, can I go to the next slide? Thank you. And that's actually 90% of all the ice in the world, and about 86% of all the fresh water that occurs in the form of ice on our planet. So I think when we say planet Earth, we are actually living on planet ice. And the most interesting part about Antarctica is that it's a no man's land. It belongs to each and every one of us. I did not know this as a 22-year-old until I actually went there. I then understood that it is a global common owned by each one of us. It is said that all the populations, even 7 to 8 billion people of us, we own the size of land, which is equivalent to a big football field. That's how big the land that you own in Antarctica. Nobody owns it, but we all own it together. And that's the beauty of the place. And as population grows, we will have more and more people who will want to go to Antarctica as well. But there is one particular organization that I went with and called 2041. On the next slide, Emma. I wanted to focus about the role of youth that 2041, the organization that took me to Antarctica, focuses on. We believe that young people are the perfect people to understand that it's always about the future. And I think more about understanding that there is a lot that we are having in common now because of globalization. And as we get to discover more and more places, it makes us realize that we are one and all the same. And whether it be Antarctica or Arctic or India, the fact is that we live on one planet. And one of the reasons why we believe that we need more and more young champions for the poles is because of the fact that we are all interconnected. And it has to be intergenerational as well. So when we go on the expedition, we go with a number of people from all walks of life. especially the leader of the ship and expedition, Robert Swan himself, is the first person to walk to both the North and South Poles. And so he brings his wisdom along with a number of other leaders of his generation who then come together and provide the most amazing resources to young people to become champions for the Antarctic. However, it was not all beauty. Antarctica is a very, very pristine and peaceful place. However, we also get to learn about the dark side of human history in one of the most peaceful places on the planet. Here you can see an example of a island which was used for whaling for over 100 years. And the issue is that it still exists. This literally shows us what the impact we're having on these very fragile ecosystems. So the whaling station has not been in use for over 100 years, and yet it still exists there. And it's a typical example of the tragedy of the commons. But today we have so many more solutions, and we are able to work on them together. The best news that I've heard in the last 1 year is that now solar is going to be super cheap around the world by 2025, and coal is going to get phased out. And so we are finally reaching a place where there are so many solutions that we don't need to go to the Arctic and Antarctic to really exploit nature anymore. And there are solutions, right? One of the really good examples of solutions that we have is in the form of the Antarctic Treaty. So the Antarctic Treaty has been in place since the year 1961, and it has been protecting the particular continent, keeping it the most peaceful place on the planet, because of which there is no military use and there is absolutely no nuclear waste dumped. And there's so many other explorations like oil and gas and fossil fuel restrictions that protects the place and keeps it only available for scientific purposes. And that's something that was possible even during the post-World War era and through the Cold War. So definitely this place has served as an example of peace to the entire planet in many ways, and for over 5 to 6 decades now. The other place, which I talked about in the beginning, which is the Arctic, and which is the focus of today's discussion, it is now warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. As you can see, that even NASA and many other scientists have fully confirmed to us that Earth is warming at an unprecedented rate, and the surface temperature has changed rapidly, extensively in the last few decades. And this is going to get worse because, as Emma mentioned, we also have the albedo effect, where the ice actually reflects a lot of the sunlight back into the atmosphere. But right now, that's not happening. So we are going to face a lot of consequences. And like she said, also, what happens in the Arctic and the Antarctic doesn't stay there. It impacts us globally. Some of the exponential impacts that we can expect to see happening much more in the coming decades includes like ocean warming and food chain disruption, floods and food insecurity. We are going to lose a few species in the process, and we're going to have a lot more climate refugees, which is going to cause a lot of conflicts. Despite this, I have hope. The threats to Arctic and the Antarctic include deep seabed mining, oil and gas exploration, seismic blasting, tourism, something that I mentioned earlier, that a lot of us are wanting to go to these places to look at it. And with political intrusion, there's a lot of possible militarization that is also expected in these regions in the near future. However, because we can, doesn't mean we should be doing this. There have been examples like the Antarctic Treaty, which have protected fragile ecosystems. And the world has come together before to jump into action to save the commons. A very clear example of this is the Montreal Protocol, which is actually a hole in ozone that was caused over the Antarctic in the mid-1980s. And this happened due to the use of chlorofluorocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons in refrigeration equipment. And because they were heavy gases, they rose into the atmosphere and then went down to the magnetic South Pole. And because of that, the ozone hole appeared there. But the Montreal Protocol, which came into action in 1989, actually made sure that no more chlorofluorocarbons are in use. It completely banned that particular chemicals. And now it is being said that the ozone layer is healing itself in the Antarctic. Plus, it's also being told that, in fact, that serves as a good example to see how we can actually go beyond our targets. Now we have also banned, I think the Kigali Agreement also bans the hydrofluorocarbons. So that's also reducing a lot of pollution that's caused due to refrigerants in other parts of the world, not just the ozone hole. And that's just one example of an international agreement that has helped the polar regions. But a lot of leadership is happening on the ground, especially in the Arctic cities. Cities are creating climate resilience through policy and best practice sharing. Some of the good examples for this is in the form of having climate action plans for the regions and for the cities, following international standards, and using microgrids. Because Arctic is so isolated in nature, it is the perfect place to use technologies like microgrids for energy security. And also cities are taking initiatives that include like, electric vehicles and buses so that, we can have less emissions in the Arctic. So it's already happening. And along with that, when we have young people from around the world inspiring each other to work together to drive action on the ice crisis, I believe that there's never been a better time for us to kind of work together and create a better planet for the future. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much, Divya. So awesome to hear about your experiences in the polar regions. If anyone has any questions for Divya, like Anastasia said, we'll have time for those at the end. Also, I just want to add, before we move on to Savannah, that this image with our kind of hands-off signs is actually at the New York City climate strike in September 2019, which brought hundreds of thousands of people to the streets. And one of our Arctic Angels, Shia Bastida, was a lead organizer of this. Without further ado now, I'll hand over to Savanah, our Arctic Angel in Alaska.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. So my name is Savanah Elliott. I became an Arctic Angel fairly recently, late this summer, 2020. I was lucky enough to meet this really incredible group of women through my mom, actually, who works as an educator for Global Choices. I've really always been a lover of the outdoors. I grew up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and I've been interested in climate change for a while, but I have a background in food and nutrition. So I didn't know exactly where I fit into climate change activism for a while. I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in nutrition and food from Colorado State University. And then this past August, I moved up to Anchorage, Alaska to start a dietetic internship at University of Alaska with a concentration in Alaska Native culture and the Alaska healthcare delivery system. So before I dive further in, I just wanted to share a few photos to give you an idea of where I live. So this picture on the left is the Knik Glaciers, so just outside Anchorage, Alaska. The one in the middle is my puppy with a grizzly bear sign in a park next to our house. And then a moose that we frequently see on our walks. So that just gives you an idea of what the climate's like here and what our environment is. So since moving to Alaska and joining Arctic Angels, my eyes have really been open to the idea and the importance of Arctic activism, particularly the importance of involvement from youth and Native and Indigenous peoples. So regarding my specialty in food systems are a huge contributor to climate change. So between land use, crop production, maintaining livestock, fisheries, and distribution, we're taking a whole lot from the earth without really much consideration of the consequences. Oftentimes, people contributing the least to climate change are affected the most. So that's minority groups, low incomes, and Native populations. So what are some of the steps to you starting Arctic activism? Can you go back one slide, Emma? Sorry. So first, be open to learning and having conversations. I really can't emphasize this enough. No matter who you are, where you are in life, you can always keep learning, and change can't happen without conversations. So I urge you to keep an open mind, be patient with those learning, because it takes time, and be respectful towards those teaching. It's really important to learn from Indigenous people and elders. These are the people who have lived experiences and a culture that centers around giving back more than what you take from the land. I would also consider the impact on Indigenous communities and culture. As Emma and Divya mentioned, the Arctic is warming at twice the rate of the entire globe due to the Arctic Sea ice melting, and Native communities in the far north are already seeing these impacts. So that's seen in coastal erosion from rising sea levels, melting permafrost, changing migration patterns in land and sea animals, changing growing season, which affects their subsistence food sources. And then melting ice also impacts where they can access, where they can hunt, different things like that. So these photos, the first one on the left is in Utqiagvik, Alaska, formerly known as Barrow, and it's a bowhead whale. So there's typically 2 hunting seasons for Alaskan Natives. There's different regulations because whale hunting is a big part of their culture. They have a fall hunt and a spring hunt. The fall hunt, normally they see thousands of bowhead whales making their annual migration. And in Utqiagvik specifically, they usually have caught at least 1 whale by October 1st. However, in 2019, there was no reported sightings of any bowhead whales by October 30th. So this is due to the shifting migrations and warming oceans. They've been found to have been swimming deeper and at different times. So that really impacts the communities that rely on these hunts. And it's not only important to feed the communities, but it's also really central to their culture. They've been doing this for generations, using every part of the whale, bringing the whole community together, and it's having a huge impact on their culture. The second picture is in Javelina, Alaska, and we're going to play a quick video to explain more about that. The volume on, Emma? Emma, is the volume on?
Yeah.
Storms are literally eating the village alive. Crashing ocean waves are eroding the island, once protected by huge chunks of sea ice. The same ice that protected their ancestors and reliably froze over for the winter hunt.
Everything is gone. The ocean is empty like.
As recently as the 1970s and 80s, village elders remember the winter sea ice growing to 10 feet in thickness. This past year,
It's kind of got a high-pitched echo, Emma.
not thick enough to hunt on and not thick enough to protect the village either.
Climate change have caused so much problem.
A congressional audit and the Army Corps of Engineers have identified these 4 Alaskan villages in desperate need of immediate relocation, saying climate change is the issue here.
The Corps sent this rock that came from nowhere.
For now, the big rock wall is holding, just barely.
Today, Sunday, September 6th, 2015.
It came down to
Okay, well, that was a little bit hard to hear, but hopefully you guys got the idea. The rising oceans are really changing the way that this community is living. There's 400 people on that island that will probably need to be relocated soon. Right now they have a temporary fix of that rock wall, but in 2015, that news article said that they're considered some of the first climate refugees in the United States. So bringing Native voices to the center of solutions and conversations is really going to be helpful. I really believe that modern technology combined with traditional ecological knowledge is going to help us adapt and mitigate the effects that we're seeing. So why should we care, and why is youth activism important for Arctic protection? So all humans are innately impacted by and have an impact on the environment. We all interact with the land and animals. We all eat food, we consume goods, create waste. Some of us drive cars. There's really no way around it. Of course, it's going to be different, and you're going to see different things depending on your career. It's kind of interesting to take a minute, think about what you do for a living, what your future career might be, your interests, or even your hobbies, and how these impact the world around you. It can kind of really shift your perspective. Youth voices represent the future, but it's really intergenerational collaborations that are key to addressing an issue of this scale. Because this issue is so urgent, we need to collaborate across generations and come together to find holistic and sustainable solutions. Young people are really essential in leading the climate movement right now and have really brought new energy back into it, which is something that I love about the Arctic Angels. So different ways that you can get involved. Activism looks different for everyone. Not everyone feels comfortable going to a public protest, holding up signs, and some people may even have limits to striking, such as the case in Russia right now. But I would urge you to find what you feel comfortable doing, how you can learn, and how you can teach others. So some examples are Arctic Angels are, as you've seen so far, are very diverse, range from ages 9 to I think 30, and they have a wide variety of specialties and interests. So on the right side, some of the examples, we had a group of ladies speak at the Climate Action Business Summit. I was able to participate in an Arctic Animals event, which was really fun. We basically got to talk to preschoolers and kindergartners about Arctic animals. And then upper right picture, again, is that Hands Off the Arctic campaign with the hats that Emma mentioned. Some other ideas, social media is a huge one if you're looking for places to get involved or to learn. There's so many different people sharing about this, talking about it right now. You might be one of them. You can also get involved in local school groups, support and buy from sustainable companies, and just take time to learn about climate change. So really, activism doesn't have a singular definition, and don't feel like you can't get involved. So another interesting way to think about it is creativity. So one of our angels is an artist, and she recently shared some of her work that centers around this conversation. So if you're an artist or a writer, a photographer, consider doing this as well. Our activism is so different for everyone, and can really be exciting. I think that's all I have, Emma.
Cool. Okay, well, awesome. Thank you, Savanah. And I'm sorry about the audio. I hope it will be okay for the next couple of videos. I think we've resolved it. But I just, want to come back to Savanah's point on taking action and how it can look different for everyone, particularly in relation to my earlier ask to hold in your minds what you would do to capture attention. Everyone has different skills and different strengths, and I think the real magic happens when different strengths and skills come together under a common goal, like protecting our planet. So finally, I'd like to hand over to Mitzi Jonel Tan, our Arctic Angel in the Philippines, to hear about her experience taking action, why she cares, an example of how she has collaborated with young people to come up with creative means of capturing attention.
Hi everyone, so I am Mitzi from the Philippines, and this video should give a brief explanation of how I became an activist and how it's like being an activist in the Philippines. but while it's loading, I can tell you a bit more about it. Basically, the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the climate crisis. Recently, last November, that was actually when Emma and I got to talk about becoming an Arctic Angel. It was in the middle of a typhoon. There were 4 typhoons that hit us in the span of 3 weeks, and the devastation happening in the Philippines is so intense, despite our country only contributing less than 0.37% to the climate crisis. Yet we're the second most vulnerable country in the world. And you can see that what's happening in the Philippines, it's not just, if you could go to the next slide, Emma, or let's see if the video will work. What's happening in the Philippines, it's not just here, it's a thing that's happening across the world, where global South countries are more impacted.
International community. A lot of what we do is campaigning and amplifying the voices of our environmental defenders, joining their fight for justice and demanding accountability from our national government to act urgently, because this is a climate crisis. Last month, we were hit by the strongest typhoon on the planet this year. And then barely a week after that, a typhoon brought a month's worth of rain in under 24 hours. When we heard that the typhoons were coming, my organization, Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, immediately started to prepare for relief operations. We talked to the communities and asked them what they needed the most. And there was an overwhelming response that they were hungry and that they were angry. They needed food, so we went to the small markets, cooked and prepared everything ourselves, and then went to the communities most impacted. We made sure not to just give them relief, but also to talk to them and ask them about what they experienced, what they saw, how they felt, and we talked to them. Some of the saddest stories were about how some of the people, they just didn't see them again. They didn't see their neighbors anymore. They don't know where their family is. I have such vivid memories of doing my homework with a flashlight, because the electricity would be out because of the raging typhoon outside. I would wake up in the middle of the night with the winds howling outside, and my room would be flooded. I'd have to scoop flood water out before it consumed my room. We know that we have to keep fighting. We know that this isn't just about the weather and the environment. It's about justice. It's about knowing that we deserve a safe present, a just present, and a green and sustainable future.
So yeah, basically that's a brief overview of what's happening in the Philippines. And if you go to the next slide, Emma, you'll see that there is a need for this thing to be a global youth movement. We are faced with a systemic global crisis. We need to face with a global movement that looks at systemic solutions, especially since those least responsible to the crisis are those who are most impacted. And you'd think that you'd ask me, why do I care? Someone from the Philippines, why do I care about what's happening in the ice across the world? And it's because if we don't take care of the ice, what we're experiencing, what you just saw in the video, it's only going to get worse. And so we need to organize globally. That this is one thing that Fridays for Future is doing. It's also something Arctic Angels is doing. And you need to really do all types of activism, everything that you can, campaigning, advocating, art, like Savanah just said, everything that you can, so that we can, it is a battle for survival at this point, and fighting for the ice is part and crucial to that battle. Next slide, Emma. So yeah, that, as I said, we need to unite everyone, and we need to amplify the voices of the most marginalized. And there are so many different ways to do this. And one of it is, I'm part of this project called Climate Live, where we're basically organizing concerts for the climate in order to raise awareness about the climate crisis through the power of music.
Hello. Music has the power to unite people. It's the one universal language on the earth.
We need to harness this power in one harmonious voice. 7.6 million took to the streets to demand climate action in September 2019.
But leaders still fail to act with the necessary urgency.
Millions of young people around the world are demanding change, and it's time to stop the apathy on climate change.
Can you hear us?
Time is running out for the planet as we know it.
So, to change everything, we need everyone.
Youth climate activists, supported by NGOs and music and events professionals, are organising Climate Life.
Concerts to harness the power of music.
Following the model of school strikes, there'll be both events on large and small scales across the globe.
Events are being planned in over 40 countries.
We have three main aims.
Engage a new audience to the climate movement.
Educate more people about the challenges faced today by those on the front lines of ecological breakdown.
Empower young people to pressure world leaders to take actions to combat the climate crisis.
We are kicking things off all over the world with events on April 24, 2021.
Followed by even more concerts on October 16.
For the UN COP26 climate conference next year, where governments will have to renew their Paris Agreement pledges.
It is crucial for our future
that world leaders are more ambitious.
Can you hear us yet?
The climate crisis hasn't stopped for COVID, and neither can we.
The time is now.
We can't do it alone. We need you.
Please use your privilege and fight for us.
It is so vitally important that anyone with a platform of any size does whatever they can to support the youth-led climate movement.
Our generation dictates the future.
This is the most important issue that we face.
The louder we shout, and the more we'll be heard.
We only have one planet. We need to take care of it.
We can make a difference. It's not too late to turn things around.
Together, we need to be united in one voice. Make your voice counted too.
Please join us.
S'il vous plaît, rejoignez-nous. Por favor, junte-se a nós.
Come join us, man.
Let's do this.
Hello. Music.
Do you have anything else to add, Mitzi, or are you all done? I just love that video. Thank you so much. That was awesome, everybody. So I'd just like to end on what you will do now and have a think about it. Even write your pledge or what these angels have inspired you to get involved in, or maybe what skills you use or what talent you want to start creating things with. In the chat section, I know sometimes after sessions like these, there can be a lot of talking, but yeah, I think it can help you hold yourself accountable and really go forward and take action when you kind of pledge or make sure you think of a tangible action. So on the note of taking action, this quote here is by Robert Swan, who Divya talked about, and he runs the expeditions to Antarctica. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And I hope that Divya, Savanah and Mitzi have inspired you to believe in your power to make a difference for our planet and the Arctic. So if you would like to get involved in Arctic Angels and learn more about us or how Global Choices is taking action to protect the Arctic sea ice, then please do get in touch or head to our website, www.globalchoices.org, and feel free to follow us on social media to get updates on our planet and what we're up to, as well as the network. And so we'll move on to questions now. Thank you everybody for joining. The questions for Savanah, Divya and I, but just first, I have my own question for everybody, and I'm going to start by asking each of you what your call to action is that you'd like to be shared with everyone that's tuned in, and then we can head on to some other questions. So I think Anastasia, who introduced the session, our Arctic Angel as well, is also going to join in on the call to action. So if I go to Anastasia first, and then we'll come to you, Savanah, and you, Mitzi, and then you, Divya, for just a short call to action. So over to you, Anastasia.
Yeah, so what I would like to say is that actually the Arctic has a population of 4 million of people, but ice loss is changing the weather in the rest of the world, so not only in the Arctic region. And what is happening to the Arctic now is a global problem that affects us and our future. and solving this problem requires action, even small actions from each of us. So everyone has the ability to influence the situation, and we must use this ability for the Arctic future and the future of our planet.
Awesome, thank you. And Savanah?
Yeah, so keep in mind simple for those new to activism. I would urge everyone to learn something new and teach something new to someone. Caveat to that, consider your sources, avoid sharing misinformation, but really learn as much as you can, be open to conversations, find someone new to learn from.
And Mitzi?
I was going to say the same thing as Savanah, so I have to think of something new now. I would say find creative sources to learn from. So don't go like, I mean, I know it's easier to just start with like Google or an Ecosia search, but I would never have known about how crucial the Arctic is if I didn't, you know, go to different Instagram pages that I didn't see before. So like try to like go out of the circle that you're usually in.
Thank you. And Divya, finally?
My call to action would be to actually talk about, help people learn about the year 2041. Because that's the year until when Antarctica is protected because of the treaty. And I think it's important for us to remember that, you know, 2041 is only 20 years away, and we have a very important job of protecting the planet. And I think if we can at least keep one, you know, one thing that we can learn from Antarctica is that we can protect our planet if we want, and we really desire to do so. So I hope that if you learn about the Antarctic in 2041, and then you can understand how you can also protect other parts of the planet.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Divya. If anybody has any questions, then please do write them in the chat and maybe say whether they're for Mitzi, Divya, or Savanah. If no one has one, then I can ask a few more, because I could always ask these wonderful women more questions about their work. Just check the chat. I don't see any, so I'll dive in with one, or Anastasia, if you would like to, then please do. I think I'll start by asking why intergenerational action is important to protect our planet, and whoever would maybe like to dive in and take that one, please do.
I can take that first. I mentioned it briefly. I was 22 years old, and I really had no idea climate change was not something that you studied in textbook back then. And so for me, all the wisdom that I got about, you know, nature and how important it's to protect nature, everything came from the voices who have seen so much in their lifetime. They had seen the planet change, they had experienced climate change firsthand. And so I think embracing the wisdom that these, especially in the Arctic, also looking at the elders who have so much knowledge and wisdom to pass on to the younger generation. I think if we are able to tap into that knowledge and wisdom, then we would truly know how to really protect the planet. Because everything that has happened, like plastic, you know, the plastic boom or whatever, happened in the last 15, 20 years. And everybody who lived before the 80s would probably tell you about a simpler life, and there's so much to learn from them about it.
Thank you, Divya. If anybody else has anything to add to that question, then feel free to dive in, but there's been a couple go in the chat, so I can go for them. So what have you learned from being with a group of like-minded people? I think that Lexi means with the Arctic Angels. Savanah, if you'd like to maybe take that one, or Mitzi.
Yeah, I can go ahead. I think it's been really empowering, honestly. Like I mentioned, I really didn't know where I fit into climate activism for a while, but being surrounded by women, I mean, we have a 9-year-old in the Arctic Angels, and I think that's incredible. And then just seeing the work that Divya, Mitzi, Anastasia, and Emma are doing kind of shows you the possibilities and that what we're doing matters and makes a difference. So I think it's been, like I said, empowering and yeah, incredible so far.
Well, thank you, Savanah. I also, there's just been one come in, maybe Mitzi could take this one. Are you discussing these issues and initiatives with your government to cause some change from the top?
The thing with the Philippine government is we still have to get to that point where they acknowledge that the climate crisis is a problem. Recently, there has been more talk about this since there was a huge typhoon, but it's not even about the immediate action points yet. It's more of about, hey, this is a problem, because they have this history of ignoring the science here in the Philippines, like outrightly just ignoring what our scientists are saying, kind of similar to another president that just got out of office. Thank God. So we're gonna see, I guess, what happens next. A lot of what we need to do more, actually, and this was a question in the chat too about climate literacy, is getting people to understand why the climate crisis is so important, why the Arctic ice is so important, and the Antarctic ice. Even if we are in a region, in a tropical country across the world, why should we care about it? And because it is interconnected with one another, and that's something that we're really trying to work on.
If anybody else wants to dive in and answer that, then please do. But if not, I can move on to another one. This one would be great for Divya. It's just come into the chat as you spoke about the Antarctic Treaty. How do actions for protecting two different polar regions, the Arctic and the Antarctic, can inform and help one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think more than anything else, it's because the geographies are so similar. There's a lot that can be learned. The only big difference between the Antarctic and the Arctic is that the Arctic has prominent civilization. And so there's a lot of human activity happening because there are already people living there. But that kinds of becomes a little, it makes it a little more politically sensitive in nature. However, I think what we get to learn from the Antarctic Treaty is that people can exist peacefully, coexist peacefully. So there are a number of polar stations that are in very close vicinity on the continent, and they all live very amicably because they're on the remotest place on the planet, and they know that they need to be there to support each other. And I think that goodwill that we learn from the Antarctic can be replicated in the Arctic, because we know that the sea ice is so fragile in the Arctic and that it needs our attention. So I think with just what we have learned, I mean, there's a lot of literature that you can just pick off the Antarctic Treaty itself and put it there. But in general, I think there's also a lot of lessons to learn of how cooperation in that region has so many lessons to take away. Another thing is my favorite story, and I want to share this because it's my favorite inspiration of all time. It's that, I mean, I shared the slides about the whaling station in Antarctica. And as I mentioned, whaling was an activity that happened more than 100 years ago at this point. But at that time, whales were hunted so extensively, so excessively, that they were almost driven to extinction. However, it took 100 years, but all the populations of whales have now bounced back. In most parts of the planet, most of the species are thriving. Yes, they are getting affected due to climate changes that are happening in the last 10 years, but in general, they bounced back from almost being extinct. And it's my favorite story of nature bouncing back. So when you left Antarctica alone, nature thrived and the whole planet came back alive. And that's the best example that we can take from Antarctica to say that, if we did that in the Arctic, we would protect so many species and so much of nature over there. So there's so much to learn.
Thank you, Divya. You mentioned resources you can pick up, and that leads really well onto another question that we've had come in, which it would be great maybe to hear 2 or 3 recommendations from all of you. I should tell you what the question is first. It's, could you recommend some resources we can start with, maybe podcasts, films, or even books? Whoever wants to jump in, please do. Maybe Savanah, are you able to go first on a book or a podcast, or a YouTube channel or an Instagram account or something that you could recommend for people to get started with and to learn a little bit more about this topic?
Mm-hmm. So the easy answer is Global Choices and Arctic Angels. Definitely a good resource to start with. And if you have questions for specific people, I think all the angels are open if you want to reach out to them. To ask more questions, that's a great way to do it as well. As far as where I started, I was in a research lab for a long time at Colorado State University, so I read research papers sometimes, which isn't maybe the funnest, most fun source. But really, there's so many resources out there on social media these days. I think other people might have more specific recommendations.
Just to add to that as well, Global Choices on our website, there is all of the Arctic Angels bios. And like I said, everybody is so diverse with their own backgrounds that if anybody has any questions, my email is emma@globalchoices.org if you'd like to be connected with one of the angels to talk with them about something specifically that you can see they're specialized in. And we also, on the site, we have a resource library with links to various documents and papers around different topics, and they're all divided into different topics. So yeah, I'll go over to maybe Mitzi now, who I'm sure will have.
Okay, I'm not muted. For resources online, well, I guess what I like to do is look for people who I don't usually follow. So let's say I will go to someone's Instagram page, someone I really like, and then look through their followers or look through their following list and then try to find someone new. That way I kind of just go out of my social media circle, like your own echo chamber. And you'll find like really cool things sometimes. Some recommended Instagram accounts though are Bad Activist Collective. I'm gonna send these in the chat. I think it's Intersectional Environmentalist.
Yeah, it is.
And really just try to find like voices that haven't been spotlighted much, but all have a very unique perspective to them, because these are the people usually from the global south who are most impacted and have such a rich experience of the climate crisis and the fighting against it that we almost never hear about.
Divya, do you have any books or anything or podcasts to add to that? Thank you, Mitzi. I added in another Instagram account that I also love and that do quite a lot of content on the polls, which is always amazing to see.
Yeah, sorry, Emma. I didn't mean to cut you.
That's okay.
Okay, so I have two two movies on the Antarctic specifically, but interestingly, one of them was filmed in the Arctic just because it's more convenient. So the first movie is 8 Below. It's about 8 dogs, and this is a real story. 8 dogs being stuck in over winter and then rescued by their owner. And I think the actor is Paul Walker, who passed away, the Fast and Furious actor. And I think I watched it when I was a teenager, and I think it completely made me so inspired about Antarctica in general. The other movie I would recommend is March of the Penguins. It's narrated by Morgan Freeman, and it's just the most beautiful story of a species on ice. And I think these are easily accessible. However, I do want to share that when I was growing up, I was very lucky that one of my mom's friends got me Russian fairy tales when she went to Russia as a gift, and that inspired me a lot on the ice. So I don't know if somebody can order them easily, like in the US or anywhere else, but I think Russian fairy tales are really beautiful, and that inspired me a lot about just the ice in general.
So Divya, you didn't actually see snow until you went to the Antarctic, but you were reading about the ice and the snow when you were young.
Yeah, I was. And I watched 8 Below like a few years before I went to the Antarctic. Yeah.
And I think this is the final question we'll do, because we're coming up to the hour now, and I think this is a great one to end on, especially as Mitzi said, it's still hard in working to get her government to acknowledge climate change. So it's how to communicate with people who deny climate change and don't believe that we have to protect the poles. So I guess how to approach a conversation with that person, or maybe you could think of that communication in a larger scale. Up to you how you interpret that. Savanah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think this is super important, especially if it's someone that you're close to or that you care about. You don't want to, it can be a big source of tension. So I think kind of setting the scene, like make sure you're in a good environment and that you come into it with an open mind and that you're willing to listen, and hopefully they're willing to do the same, hearing each other's sides, bringing in really good sources. But yeah, like if you're, I've always found it interesting, like if you're at a dinner party with your whole family and someone wants to talk about a controversial issue, whether it be climate change or politics, like that's probably not the best situation. It's probably going to cause more tension. So just setting the environment right, I think is important.
And Divya?
My take is that when somebody says, "Oh, I don't believe in climate change," or if it's human made, I think I tell them, forget about climate. What about your food, right? Like, what about your health? These are two important factors for anybody on the planet. And when you go personal and say, this is how people's health is getting affected, like the smog in New Delhi, that is causing, children to suffocate, and, they're never gonna, have normal lungs, like, people who grew up in much more cleaner, breathing cleaner air. So, I think always taking it to a very personal level kind of helps set the ground to then say that, okay, so this all happens because of, something that's happening in the atmosphere, and everything that happens is interconnected.
And Mitzi?
For me, it depends on why they don't believe. Like, is it because they aren't exposed to it? Is it because they don't know what's happening? For example, I spend a lot of my time with fishing communities and farmers here in the Philippines, and a lot of them aren't exposed to the climate crisis because, well, one, education is only for the privileged here. Second, if you do have climate education, they don't really teach it very well. So you don't really know much about the climate crisis, or especially about the Arctic regions. And so it depends on what the reason why they don't believe. I agree with Divya that you go for what they already know and what they already understand. So if I'm talking to fishing communities, I talk to them about rising sea levels because that's what they see. I'm not going to talk to farmers about the rising sea levels when they've never seen the ocean their whole life. And like, it doesn't make sense. And then when they start listening to you, that's when you start talking more about things that they might not be familiar with, like the ice, and then connecting it to what they're already seeing, so they understand the importance to them. And then if it's someone who really just does not want to believe in me, usually I will reserve my energy for people who I can convince. I would just put them on the side for now, and then I'll go back to them later once I've convinced everyone else in the group.
Oh my God, yeah, that is so important. Yeah.
Thank you everyone so much. That was awesome advice from all of you. I see a question from Letitia Ingram about climate literacy in school, and I think Mitzi just kind of covered the problems with education there, but perhaps we're at 1 past the hour now, so we will finish. But in answer to Letitia as well, this webinar is recorded, and I'm sure that Divya and Savanah and Mitzi will be happy to answer your question at a later date. And the recording will be available on our website. If you'd like to have the recording to pass on to other people, then please do email emma@globalchoices.org and I'll share the link with you. But thank you so much for joining, everybody. It's really been awesome, and the questions as well. Thank you for everybody that entered them. And yeah, thank you everyone again. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.